So I'm actually recording at not late at night. Obviously, it is more light in the background today. I'm recording this at 11 a.m. on Thursday. Usually I do a full game recap episode, but for today, I'm bringing on Adam Gretz of Pensburgh and Pro Hockey Talk. We're going to get into everything regarding the Penguins, Geno suspension, Brian Dumoulin's bad play, the playoffs coming up, and so much more that's coming up right after this drop.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am your host, Hunter Hodes. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Hunter Hodes. Follow the show's Twitter at @LO_Penguins. So, joining me now is Adam Gretz from Pro Hockey Talk and Pensburgh. And I've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a while, Adam. I'm glad that you can finally come on. A big game for the Penguins tonight against the New York Islanders. They'll try to avenge what the heck happened in overtime in the shootout from last game, where they kind of just basically deserved to lose. I felt like with that power play. And then the shootout where I think they're just kind of trying to abolish it. What did you overall think about that game? And what do you think the Penguins have to do tonight to come out on the better side of the result? I mean, personally, I just think if the game doesn't go to a shootout, they have a great chance.
Yeah, they seem to have a very obvious contempt for the shootout. They just slowly skate down the middle of the ice and just kind of put it on net and hope for the best. And, that's nothing new. I thought the thing that was really frustrating about the game on Tuesday was the power play in overtime. Pretty much from the time New York took that penalty, everything was just a disaster. They almost put the puck in their own net on the delayed penalty, which almost would have been a more satisfying way to lose than the way they lost. Because, but then, that happens. Then they get the power play that they just totally squander. It was just a terrible power play. Probably one of the worst 4-on-3 overtime power plays you're ever going to see. Just nobody would shoot the puck. Nobody would take a shot. Nobody would take a chance. But I thought the thing that stood out about that game, and this has been kind of something that stood out the past couple games, is they have really been struggling to get out of their own defensive zone. I thought the Islanders were kind of all over them most of the night. They forced a lot of turnovers. 2 of the Islanders' goals came off of just really bad turnovers that just gave them wide open guys for wide open chances. The Brian Dumoulin play along the wall is the one that I think everybody noticed. But I think it was the Islanders' third goal late in the second period, or late in the first period,
Yep.
Where Teddy Bluger just kind of threw the puck into the middle of the ice. He basically set the guy up for a one-timer. And, those types of plays, I think Mike Sullivan refers to them as hope plays, where you just kind of hope the result goes the way you want it to go. You just kind of chip it off the glass, chip it off the boards, and hope it goes to where you want it to go. But what's been happening a lot lately is it's going to the other team, or it's going for an icing, and you're still back in the defensive zone. So I think teams that have been able to get on the Penguins quickly with their forecheck and have a lot of speed have given them some problems. Carolina's given them some problems. Florida's given them some problems. And the way the Islanders play, that gave them some problems on Tuesday night. So I think for me, that's the big area they kind of have to focus on right now. I think if you take care of that, a lot of the other problems you think they have kind of go away. You're not going to be defending as much. You're going to be in the offensive zone more. Goaltending becomes less of a factor. If you're controlling the puck in the offensive zone, you're more likely to get on the power play. So they fix that. I think a lot of these other problems kind of fix themselves. But I think that's the big thing I want to look for in this game.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you described it, they're playing the defensive zone. They were kind of doing I think your tweet was the Rob Scuderi chip off the glass play and hoping that they're A, not jumping up to deflect the puck down, or B, not going against the boards to just keep it in the zone, because I felt like, the Penguins were doing that a lot. And, that does bring me a little bit to Brian Dumoulin here, Adam. What start out the season rough. turned it around a bit, actually looked like the Brian Dumoulin that I've seen, so much since 2016. And, you look at the numbers on natural stat trick at 5v5. I mean, I think his expected goals for percentage is 52%. Scoring chances, it's right around 55. Shot attempts, though, right around 50%. But, eye test wise, he hasn't been right for most of this season. And, you touched on that play. I believe it was the 4-3 goal in the third period, where it was a simple slap shot dump in from, I think it was Andy Green who had it. And Dumoulin just somehow misplays it, goes into the corner, not even a weird bounce. And then Josh Bailey, of all people, who has not had a good year for the Islanders, but still kills the Penguins because that's what he does.
He's the new Jordan Eberle.
Yeah. Deeks Casey DeSmith. Penguins are lucky that, Jeff Carter is able to tie it up on the power play. Just what has gone wrong for him? Is this injury? Is it all performance? Because I simply can't get a handle on it. I also personally think if the Penguins do clinch tonight, I mean, they will clinch, I think, sooner rather than later. They need to rest him for, I think, most of these games down the stretch.
Yeah, I think he's pretty concerning because he's at that age where players of his skill set kind of deteriorate. They don't age gracefully in their play. And I think there's a pretty sudden drop off with that. And I think we might be starting to see that happen. I mean, I'm sure he's probably not 100%. But he's been so good for so long and so stable and so reliable. It's jarring to notice him so much, because when he was at his best, you didn't notice him. He's one of those players that you don't want to notice him, because if you see him, if you notice him play, that means something's probably going wrong for him. And he's standing out a lot more this year. And I just worry with some of the plays he's making. He never used to be a guy that just had to chip the puck off the glass to get it out of the zone. He could skate a little bit. He could make a good first pass out of the zone. He could do all those things. That's what made him such a good partner for Chris Letang for so long, was that he was a solid defensive player that could complement him in that way, but he could also do enough other things with the puck that it didn't hold Letang back. And now all of a sudden, a lot of that seems to be gone. And I just worry that maybe we're starting to see the beginning of the end of him as a really high-end player. And it's a problem because I don't think he's a guy you're going to take out of the lineup. I mean, he's not a guy that's going to be the odd man out. It's going to be Mark Friedman. It's going to be Marcus Pettersson. Those are the guys that are going to sit. And you don't want to have that type of I don't want to use the word liability. I think that's too harsh, because I don't think he's at that level yet. But in a playoff series, good teams are going to exploit any weakness you have over a 7-game series. And I think back to that first Penguins Stanley Cup run back in 2016, that first-round series against the Rangers. Every time Mark Stahl and Dan Girardi were on the ice, the Penguins just crushed them. They just absolutely crushed them because they couldn't keep up. And teams will find that weakness in a 7-game series, and they will go at it. And I agree with you that I think they should be resting him some nights. I honestly think they should probably rest Chris Letang some nights as well. That's a thing that, of all the sports that could use load management and resting players, I think hockey's the one where it makes the most sense. But hockey is also the one that will be the last one to do it, because there's that pride factor, and there's that, we're tough. We can play through this. It's just not going to happen. But I think some of these veteran guys, they could use the occasional night off to be fresh for what is hopefully a long playoff run. So I definitely think once they clinch, they should probably sit him a little bit. And I think you have to have a very real discussion this offseason about whether or not he's the guy you try to move. I know, Pettersson and Marino have long-term contracts, and maybe they haven't quite developed the way you want them to develop, but I think there's still more upside there. And I just worry about what Dumoulin's going to look like next season. So it's definitely a concern. It's not a guy you've ever had to be worried about these past 6 or 7 years, but I think now you do a little bit.
Yeah, the Penguins are going to have some really tough decisions, I think, on that blue line this summer because, going into it, I think a lot of people even thought Matheson for one point was maybe the one to get moved. Now he's playing at a very high level. I've seen the takes that, oh, wow, maybe he could replace Chris Letang. No, that's not true because Chris Letang is a better defensive defenseman and he can do things with the puck that Matheson simply can't. And Matheson also can't take top pairing minutes. So,
or special teams minutes.
yeah, yeah.
I really like Mike Matheson. I like the way he's played this season. I think he's a fun player because there's always something happening when he's on the ice. But I think people forget we've seen what happens when he's the top defenseman on a team.
Yes.
And and we have like 5 years of that evidence in Florida when he was playing 22 minutes a night and he was one of the top guys. It didn't go well. It's one of the reasons he became available in a trade. And I think the Penguins have found a nice sweet spot for him where they can shelter him a little bit. They can utilize his strengths. They can take advantage of his skill and his talent. And his weaknesses aren't exposed too much. I think they found the right spot for him. And I wouldn't mess with that.
No, I mean, I wouldn't either. I know he's taking top pairing minutes with Chris Letang right now. It is the right move for at least a little bit.
He's not the top guy.
Exactly. Yeah, he's the number two. Chris Letang will do what he does because that's just who he is. I know he had a rough game last game, but that's not the norm for him. Don't worry, Adam. I always have sometimes some small rants on the anti-Letang people because it's something else to say.
A lot of them.
Yeah, there's way too many. Still a lot more to get to for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast, including Evgeni Malkin suspension and of course the playoffs right around the corner. But before we get to that, BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the MLB season. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action that is BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm, of course, Hunter Hodes. You can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. My Twitter right there is at Hunter Hodes. So, Adam, we'll get this out of the way here with the Evgeni Malkin suspension. For me, rightfully deserved. You can't be just cross-checking people in the face with your stick right there. He's gotten suspended before. He has to just know the situation that he's in. Of course, this is going to bring out the conspiracy crowd by saying, well, the Penguins are not consistently punished and they get all the calls and, all this stuff that really nobody can prove and whatever. What was your assessment on the Malkin suspension? Because, I also think for me, it obviously has a lot of negative, but if there's one small positive, that is that he gets right for the playoffs, I think.
Yeah, I thought is definitely justified. I thought it was one of the rare times where the Department of Player Safety pretty much got it right. We saw Austin Matthews get the 2-game suspension for cross-checking in the outdoor game against Buffalo. Malkin got those 2 games, and then he got the extra 2 games for having a prior history because he's got suspended once before, and he has a fine both for stick incidents. When it's the 3rd time you've been called for it, you're going to get hit a little bit harder. And I thought maybe 3 games. I thought he was going to get the 2 games that Matthews got, and then the additional game for having a prior record. They gave him 4. I'm fine with that. I think in terms of suspensions, the league should always be heavier handed as opposed to lighter handed. I don't think suspensions have enough teeth to them these days. And I think you have to take this thing seriously. I think when you hit guys hard, that's when the behavior changes. I think that's why a guy like Brad Marchand keeps doing what he does, because he hasn't gotten that big suspension yet. Say what you want about Tom Wilson, but ever since he got that huge suspension for the Oscar Sundqvist hit, you don't see him in the news as much. You don't see him toeing the line as much. I know he had the incident last year at Madison Square Garden with Panarin, but he hasn't been blindsiding people. He hasn't been, we haven't seen the big headshot that we saw so many of in a short period of time because he missed 20 games. You take guys out, they're going to get the message. So I have no problem with the league going a little bit heavier on Malkin. It had to be suspended, had to be significant. It was just a stupid play. I mean, you can't do that. I'm not even sure what really caused it. Like it was just kind of like him losing his mind for a minute, and you just can't do that. Not in that situation, even in that game situation. Like you can't put yourself down shorthanded there. So I have no problem with it. I do think, him having, basically a 2 weeks off here to get some rest. I kind of hate to look at it that way because he did do something stupid, but there is that silver lining where he does get some time off. He's coming back from pretty major injury. He's in his mid-30s. You hope for a long playoff run. You want him to be fresh, and now you got a chance to do that. But I have no problem with the suspension. He's got to be more composed in those situations because, teams aren't dumb. They know what buttons to push. They know whose buttons to push, and you can bet they're going to do that in a playoff series. And if you play the Rangers, they have a lot of guys that are capable of doing that. So, got to keep things in check. I'm fine with the suspension. It had to happen.
Yeah, and especially the situation at the time in like tied game going into the third, you're trying to break your losing streak. Like that could have given the game away. Nashville scores on that power play, and honestly, the Penguins are lucky it wasn't a 4-minute power play because they actually took Borowiecki to the penalty box.
Yeah, I don't know what he did.
What kind of call is that?
I don't know what he got a penalty for. It was crazy.
I feel like NHL officiating makes it up as they go along. It's just like a bunch of clown emojis or something. Just every time this stuff comes up, I don't get it. To say the least. But go ahead.
It's. I mean, there's the obvious even up calls. There's the obvious, we don't want to decide the game, so we're going to let them play. But then there's just incidents like that just make no sense. Like, as much as I disagree with it, I at least understand where the even up mindset comes from. I understand where the let them play mindset comes from. It's stupid. It shouldn't be, but it at least makes some degree of sense. A situation like that, taking both guys there and not giving Nashville a 4-minute power play or even a 5-minute, if we're being honest here, it probably should have been a 5-minute power play. Yeah. Situations like that, I'm at a loss for words with them, like how they get called and why they get called. It's insane. And to me, the officiating problem is still one of the biggest things that holds the league back in terms of,
I agree,
in terms of building viewers and gaining fans, because you have this great sport and right now the league is just swimming with amazingly talented players that could be really exciting. And we're coming to a point in the season now where the game should be getting better, and the style of play is gonna just plummet because of the way it's officiated. And we're gonna cater to the third and fourth liners instead of the superstars. And that's why I've always said, playoff hockey is great for the drama and the suspense and the intrigue and the pressure of elimination and your season ending. But the style of play, the quality of play, I don't think is better than the regular season. I think regular season games tend to have a better quality of play because it's not a wrestling match on ice. So, that's my officiating rant for the day.
And it was your tweet the other night was funny because they got the Kapanen call wrong, and then 10 seconds later they take Brock off, and I'm just like, that's your makeup call. I think Mike Sullivan along the line said, "I'm effing embarrassed for you on the bench." I thought, as you always say, Adam, you wish you could have thrown the bench on the ice.
It's funny because as soon as you realized what happened with the penalty call on the Islanders, where the Penguins went on the power play, I almost tweeted, the Penguins better score in the first 10 seconds of this power play because it's going to be a very short power play. The even up call is, and then they scored right off the face-off. So, and then the even up came literally off the next face-off.
Yeah.
Like it was still 10 seconds of game time later, but the Penguins were lucky enough to get the game tying goal in there. But yeah, I mean, I understand like human nature. You feel bad. You got the call wrong and you messed it up. But I don't think making a second bad call makes it better. Like sometimes you miss something. Sometimes bad calls happen. Sometimes bad plays happen. Sometimes you just got to let it be that. I think when you make another egregiously bad call and do so intentionally, like the first one, okay, we just messed it up. We missed it. It's a mistake. But to intentionally make, and that's what it is, it's intentionally making a second bad call. It's just outrageous to me. And we just let it, the league just lets it go. It's crazy.
I mean, this is why I would love if the officials were made available to the media after the game to answer for this kind of stuff, but the NHL is never going to do that because, well, it's just
every other sports league does it. Anytime there's a controversy, even if they just let one pool reporter go and question them, there's still somebody there where the official can at least give his perspective and say, you know what, this is what I saw. He can either defend it, double down on it, or say, you know what, I screwed up. It happens. But the NHL won't even give us that. They just tell us it's a tough job and, deal with it. Basically.
I don't get it. I never have. I always say, best sport, worst league. And, it's on display, I think, almost all the time. But stick around for our last segment for this podcast. We're going to go into some playoff talk and a little bit more. So that's coming up right after this commercial break. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I'm, of course, Hunter Hodes. So, Adam, the Penguins, they're just about there. Magic number is 3. They win tonight. They're officially in. And then, but, we've been looking at possible playoff opponents for a while. And right now, I think it's between one of 3. I can say 3 if the Rangers do pass Carolina. They're 2 points back. But it's probably down to 2. The New York Rangers, you're going on the road to Madison Square Garden. Or you're going to go to the second wildcard spot because the Washington Capitals are playing really well right now, but they also have a really tough schedule down the stretch, to say the least. Of those 2 teams, would you have a preference for the Penguins to play? Because, for me, it's tough either way. The Rangers, they play a style that's, I think, more defensive. They're going to make the Penguins work for everything. Igor Shesterkin's been the best goaltender in hockey this year, though, could a regression be coming? Who knows? Florida, they're deep at forward. Defensively, if they get Aaron Ekblad back, that's going to be even more insane. But in goal, Sergei Bobrovsky is not that good. And he is melted down in the Penguins constantly in a couple of series. Just would you have a preference as to who the Penguins will play? Or is it kind of just pick your poison?
I mean, the Eastern Conference playoffs this year are going to be so tough. There's not an easy matchup at any point. I don't think there's a result in any of the potential first-round matchups that would surprise me or be a huge upset because every team is that good. The Rangers, 3 weeks ago, I would have said the Rangers are definitely my pick because I think the Penguins were a much better team than them.
Same here.
The thing the Rangers had going for them is, as you said, Igor Shesterkin, who's phenomenal. And he did hit a little bit of a lull there over the past couple of weeks, but I think he's starting to get back on track a little bit. He's just incredible. But the trade deadline additions the Rangers made have really changed them for me. I think they're a much better team, and I think the supporting cast around Shesterkin is a lot better now. And they added Andrew Kopp and Frank Vetrano, and they're playing them in the top 6. Their top 6 was already good. And those 2 guys just make it that much better. But now they have the 2 kids on the third line, Lafreniere and Capo Caco. And those 2 guys are wild cards. They have a ton of potential. They have a ton of talent. If they put it together, and I think both of them have shown signs of doing that this season, that's a game changer for them. Because how many teams have recent number 1 and number 2 overall picks that they can put on their third line for the playoffs with that type of talent? And if those guys put it together with The top six they have Adam Fox on defense. They have the best goalie in the league this season in net. That's going to be a really tough team. And if you look at their numbers since the trade deadline, they've been one of the best teams in the league. And I know they haven't really played the toughest schedule since then. They've played 2 playoff teams in the past, 12 games. They played the Penguins 3 times, and they played Carolina. They beat the Penguins all 3 times, and they gave Carolina a really good game the other night. They're really good. They're going to be a tough team. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but Florida does not scare me as much as they should on paper. I know their offense is incredible. I know their style of play is really difficult to defend. They're very aggressive on the forecheck. They are very talented. They are very fast. They have probably the best offense the league has seen in almost 30 years. They're averaging almost 4.5 goals per game this season, which is just unheard of. I don't trust their goaltending. And in the playoffs, that's the X factor. That's the thing that can make or break you. And if I'm going into a best-of-7 series, I want to play the worst goalie. And the Florida Panthers have by far the worst goalie. And not only has Bobrovsky had playoff meltdowns against the Penguins and in general, he has been really bad for the past 2 or 3 months now. They're winning a lot of games 7-6, 6-5. They're not getting good goaltending from him. I think every year there's one team that goes out way earlier than people think, and I think this season Florida is going to be that team because they don't have the goaltending, and that's why I'm not really stressing the Penguins might fall into a wild card spot. I don't necessarily think that's a bad matchup. Look, you're going to have to beat these teams anyway if you want to go to the Stanley Cup. You're going to have. That's why I really am not sweating playoff matchups that much, because if you want to get there, you got to beat these teams at some point. And I'd rather get a team like Florida early in the playoffs when you're fresh, when you're healthy, before you've gone through 2 rounds of getting the snot kicked out of you. Play them when you're at your best. Play them when you're healthiest, and take your chance if the goaltending goes your way. So I think either way it's going to be tough. But if they do get Florida, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. I think what you want to really avoid is you want to avoid the Rangers passing Carolina and you staying in the 3 spot and having to play Carolina. That's the matchup that I would want nothing to do with, because I think Carolina is the most complete team in the East. They have no weakness. Their forwards are great. Their defense is great. And they not only have great goaltending from Freddie Anderson this season, they have a really good backup at Antti Raanta. They have 2 really good goalies. So that's the team that I think you want to avoid at all costs early on, because I don't think they can beat Carolina in a best-of-7 series.
Carolina, I felt like, was the team for a lot of the teams in the Eastern Conference that the Penguins have played this year. I think that's the team that's really just pissed them off the most, just because they can't.
They've outplayed them the most.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, even the Rangers games. I mean, first one, okay, maybe a little bit of 50-50. The Penguins got the power play goal. Second one, they got blown out, whatever. Yeah. Third one was a true coin flip. It just went the Rangers' way. The fourth one.
And I don't even think they played that bad the fourth game.
They were all right. Yeah, they didn't have they've been sick.
They weren't expected. They expected to have Crosby. They didn't have him. And what are you going to do? You know? I mean, the Rangers are going to be tough. I mean, I could absolutely see the Rangers winning that series.
Oh yeah.
But I could also see the Penguins winning that series. Just like I could see the Penguins beating Florida. I'm having a tough time envisioning them beating Carolina. I really am. So I think to rank the potential first round matchups in terms of most favorable to least favorable, I think Florida and New York are a toss up. I think Carolina is in a class all of its own of avoid.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that. I mean, sure, if you win that series against Florida, you have to play the winner of Boston, Toronto. That's just going to be the memes anyway. I mean, I want to see what happens.
I don't hate that matchup either, to be quite honest with you. The Penguins were great against Toronto this year, and I don't think Boston's that good. I know
Boston's weird because of Bergeron shutting down Crosby. That's the one that really scares me just because, and I think
Boston-
that's the team that the Penguins haven't really beaten in a playoff series in the Sid Geno era yet that I think I would love to see happen.
Boston is so weird for me because they are a legitimately good defensive team. They're great defensively, and they have four really high-end forwards: Bergeron, Marchand, Pasternak, Taylor Hall. I would even include Craig Smith, who, when he's on his game, is a really good two-way player. So they have a lot of talent. Their depth isn't very good, and I don't think their goaltending is very good. And they have the worst record in the league among playoff teams against other playoff teams. And against the other top teams in the league, they've been crushed this year. So I have no idea what to think of Boston. But yeah, if you get Florida in the first round and you beat them, and then you get the winner of Boston Toronto in the second round, I think that's probably your best possible path. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, it's tough either way. I mean, this is a gauntlet. That's the way I look at it. You know, we've known who the playoff teams are going to be for 4 months. I would say. I mean, the team that maybe gives me the most pause is the Capitals, but I mean, they're also still pretty decent. They're playing really good hockey as of late. So, you know, maybe they beat Carolina. Well, if they get Carolina round one, I mean, kind of good luck if you get that. The Rangers series, that would, I think, be interesting there too. But, you know, I think, you know, before we wrap up here, Adam, just want to get your thoughts on this. You know, everyone's going to be having their eyes on the goaltender, Tristan Jarry. You know, this is what a redemption story is all about here. You've been great for most of the regular season. They're resting him a little bit to try to get him back on track. The playoffs are 3 weeks away. If you're not playing well, there's going to be even more questions going into the offseason. How do you assess this going into the playoffs? Because, I mean, if they do get the Rangers, it is such a tall task to outplay Shesterkin. I don't know if Tristan has it in him. I'm way more confident that he can outplay Sergei Bobrovsky, to say the least. He is my biggest X factor, and I think rightfully so, because he has to play better than he did last year.
Yeah, and I have a lot more confidence in him this year than I did last year, but I am a little concerned. I think that his play has kind of dipped a little bit the past couple weeks, and the fact that they've given Casey DeSmith 2 straight starts tells you the coaching staff thinks that way too. I don't know if it's just keeping him fresh, time management type of thing, but I want to see him kind of get back to where he was earlier in the year. I think he's kind of slipped a little bit. I think that's been an underrated part of their slide here the past couple weeks. He's only won one of his last 7 starts.
Yeah.
And his save percentage is under 900 in those games. So, I mean, he has been kind of trending in the wrong direction here a little bit. And I think you put it very well that I trust him to outplay Sergei Bobrovsky. I don't know if I trust him to outplay Igor Shesterkin. And that's a huge X factor. I want to see him have some good starts here down the stretch going into the playoffs, not only to build his confidence back up, but to make me more confident in him as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that for sure. You know, I'm excited to see, I'm sure he'll get the start tonight. I think Sullivan talked to the media. I think he announced him as the starter. And then it looks like Brian Russ and Ed Rodriguez are game time decisions. Hopefully no one else is getting this stomach bug or whatever the heck it's been. I feel like over half the team has had it. And hopefully
going on for a couple weeks.
Yeah, it's been definitely weird. I think part of that is definitely I almost screwed that up. I think their dip in play can be a little bit attributed to that for sure, because I think there are some players that have not been missing games that are definitely sick. Yeah. So that's just.
And I also think the dip in play has been kind of over exaggerated a little bit. You go back to that 3-game stretch against Minnesota and Colorado, those 2 games there. They were coming off a really good stretch going into those games. I think they were like 9-2-2 ahead of going into those games. I thought they outplayed Colorado in both games. I think they really did, especially the game in Colorado. They very easily could have won both of those games. I think they probably should have won the first game. The game in Minnesota was probably their best win of the season. And not only the fact that they beat the hottest team in the league in their building in a very impressive way, but they did it shorthanded that night, losing Jason Zucker early in the game. And then, at that point, you're feeling pretty good about them. I think it's only been the past 4 or 5 games where they've really struggled. So is it just a blip on the radar? Is it the sign of, trending in the wrong direction? I think that remains to be seen. I think we become prisoners of the moment sometimes and only focus on what happened most recently instead of the big picture. So,
well,
I think some of the struggles have been a little exaggerated.
Yeah, and I can definitely tell you that the fan base is going to overreact to basically anything, even if it's a couple losses. That's just that's
what fans do.
Yeah, I mean that's the Penguins fan base for you. But Adam, I appreciate your time. Of course, thank you so much for coming on. In case some people somehow do not follow you on social media, for all of your, especially your bar stories and all of your stadium stories, which are just hilarious. Of course, your hockey takes that trumps all that. But tell all the listeners where they can follow you on social media.
Follow me on Twitter at @Gretz, and find me on NBC Sports, Pensburgh, Yardbarker, all those places. So
perfect. Yeah. So he will be back on the show. Don't worry. That's just that is the reality of the situation. Hopefully we have to have you on for a playoff game or something like that. But again, Adam, thank you so much for coming on. I'll have another episode on Friday to recap the game against the Islanders, and we'll see if the Penguins can finally clinch their playoff spot tonight, even though they've basically been in for 4 months. So I'll talk to you all then.